The Senate, having tried Donald John Trump, President of the United States, upon 2 articles of impeachment exhibited against him by the House of Representatives, and 2/3 of the senators present not having found him guilty of the charges contained therein, it is therefore ordered and adjudged that the said Donald John Trump be, and he is hereby, acquitted of the charges in said articles.
President Trump acquitted. His historic Senate trial coming to an end, but not before this dramatic moment.
My faith is at the heart of who I am.
Senator Romney, the only Republican voting guilty. President Trump, the first president impeached while running for re-election. An incredible 24 hours in the nation's capital. Just last night, the president appearing to refuse to shake Speaker Pelosi's hand at the State of the Union. Following his remarks, the Speaker ripping up his speech on camera. This as Democrats vying for the White House campaign through New Hampshire. Still not totally clear about what happened in Iowa. Joe Biden going on offense, attacking Mayor Pete Buttigieg and Senator Bernie Sanders as the candidates fight for votes ahead of our key debate on Friday. Also tonight, there's been so much talk about the deadly coronavirus. Hundreds dead, millions quarantined, the virus continuing to spread. Tonight, we'll separate fact from fiction. When should we worry? And just how dangerous is it for us here in America? And the jet breaking apart, passengers escaping any way they can. The dramatic images coming in. Good evening, I'm Tom Yamas. Thanks so much for watching tonight. Lindsay Davis is preparing for the ABC Democratic debate. She'll be back next week. We start with our big story tonight in Washington. 134 days after Speaker Nancy Pelosi came before cameras to announce the House would launch an impeachment inquiry, today the U.S. Senate acquitted President Trump on both articles of impeachment, charging him with the abuse of power and obstruction of Congress over his actions to allegedly pressure Ukraine to investigate his political rival, Joe Biden. The president is now the third one in American history to be cleared after facing removal from office. But he's the first to have a member of his own party vote for his removal, after Republican Senator Mitt Romney declared in an emotional speech that he would join with Democrats in favor of impeachment on the charge of abuse of power. ABC's Mary Bruce is on Capitol Hill tonight with this historic day.
After 5 months of investigating and a deeply divisive trial, it all came down to this. One by one, the senators standing to render their verdict.
Senators, how say you? Is the respondent, Donald John Trump, guilty or not guilty?
Every Democrat voting to convict.
Mr. Manchin, guilty.
Republicans falling in line behind the president.
Ms. Murkowski, not guilty.
But not Mitt Romney.
Romney. Guilty. Mr. Romney, guilty.
The Republican from Utah emotional as he became the first senator in American history to vote to remove a president of his own party. He called it the most difficult decision he's ever faced.
I swore an oath before God to exercise impartial justice. I am profoundly religious. My faith is at the heart of who I am. I take an oath before God as enormously consequential.
Romney declared that he is convinced beyond any doubt that President Trump pressured Ukraine to investigate Joe and Hunter Biden for his own political gain.
There's no question in my mind that were their names not Biden, the president would never have done what he did.
Romney voting to convict on the first count of abuse of power.
The president is guilty of an appalling abuse of public trust. What he did was not perfect. No, it was a flagrant assault on our electoral rights, our national security, and our fundamental values. Corrupting an election to keep oneself in office is perhaps the most abusive and destructive violation of one's oath of office that I can imagine.
He is not the only Republican to criticize the president.
The president's behavior was shameful and wrong.
But Romney was the only one who voted to convict. Explaining his own vote, Senator Marco Rubio said removing the president would inflict extraordinary and potentially irreparable damage on the country. The trial now over, but in its wake, a bitter partisan divide. It was on full display in the House chamber last night. President Trump pointedly refusing to shake House Speaker Nancy Pelosi's outstretched hand at the State of the Union. And when Trump finished his address, the speaker tore up his speech, ripping it to pieces in full view of the cameras. Afterwards, she explained why she did it.
Why did you tear up the speech?
Because it was a manifesto of mistruths.
Tonight, Pelosi responding to the Senate impeachment vote, saying their decision to acquit President Trump, quote, normalized lawlessness.
All right, Mary Bruce joins us now. And Mary, we know that Senator Mitch McConnell was the architect of the Republican game plan there in the Senate, but you observed something interesting post-acquittal.
Yeah, Tom, what's fascinating is there's been this question that we have repeatedly been asking the Republican leader really for the last several months, which is, does he think that the president's actions were completely appropriate? Was that call perfect, as the president has so often claimed? And even tonight, after this trial has concluded, Mitch McConnell was pressed repeatedly, and he still refused to say whether he thinks the president did anything wrong or not. Instead, he said the Senate has made its decision, and that as far as he's concerned, this matter is in the rearview mirror. He added that what comes next now is simply up to voters.
All right, Mary, of course, the other big moment, Senator Romney's speech and, of course, his vote. How are other senators reacting to what Senator Romney did, and how does he move forward within the Republican Party?
Well, it certainly was a risky political move, and Senator Romney acknowledged that. But he said ultimately he had to do what he felt was right here, and that he believed that his Republican colleagues were similarly following their own conscience here. The Republican leader was asked about it, didn't want to comment on it too much, it seems, but everyone here understands that Mitt Romney had to do what he felt was best for himself and his voters. And of course, he, as we know, was also thinking about how history will judge this moment as well. Tom.
Mary Bruce for us tonight. Mary, congrats to you and your team. I know it's been an incredible long slog, these more than 100 days there in Capitol Hill, but great work by you and the team. We'll see you later.
Thank you, Tom.
All right, let's bring in Chief White House Correspondent Jonathan Karl for the latest from the White House. And Jonathan, the president has been somewhat quiet since the acquittal vote. He has been a little bit active on Twitter. What's your understanding of where his mind's at right now?
Tom, he is ready to go out there and claim complete and total exoneration following this acquittal. He's also ready to take on, really go to war with those that tried to impeach and remove him from office. He has announced via Twitter this. Take a look. The president said not long ago, I will be making a public statement tomorrow at 12 p.m. from the White House to discuss our country's victory over the impeachment hoax. So that is where you will feel, you will hear a full-on Donald Trump counterattack. He feels vindicated, but also, my sense is, gearing up for revenge.
John, Mitt Romney and the president have one of the strangest relationships maybe in the history of politics, at least modern politics. The Republican Party is very much the Trump party, as you know. What happens to Senator Romney?
Well, Romney was asked about this right after he made his speech announcing his decision, and he said he fully understands that there will be enormous consequences. He said consequences not just for himself, but for his family. He said he talked, in fact, to his family before, getting them to sign off on this before he went out to make this effort. But look, he is about to feel the full brunt of Trump world. You saw Donald Trump Jr. earlier today come out and say that Romney should be expelled from the Republican Party. And even the Republican National Committee, which is chaired by his niece, came out with a pretty stinging statement attacking Romney today.
And the chairwoman saying that she doesn't always agree with him as well. Yep. John, I want to take you back to last night because I know you were there in the chamber because it was such another odd scene. We had the president not shake or appear not to shake Speaker Pelosi's hand. You had her with the curt introduction to the president and then at the end ripping up the speech on national television and making faces behind him as he was delivering that speech. John, have you ever seen anything like this, and when does this get fixed?
Well, look, nothing like this. I mean, we had very divided chamber certainly 1 year ago with Donald Trump. That's the only thing that's been close. It was a particularly bitter time last year, and the Democrats, didn't applaud hardly at all. Walked out immediately after the speech was over. But this was something else. Not only what you mentioned, Tom, each one of those things extraordinary, but also as the president was starting his speech, you had the Republican side of the chamber chamber starting to chant 4 more years. I mean, it looked like they were at a national political convention, and over on the Democratic side, it looked like they were being held there against their will, doing everything they could not to react to the president, except when they were booing and hissing. This is not the way a State of the Union is supposed to go, and certainly not the way a State of the Union has gone in the past from any other president I've covered.
All right, Jonathan Karl for us tonight at the White House. John, we thank you for that. And 48 hours later, there are still questions swirling about the Iowa caucus, those votes trickling in throughout the day. But the candidates now focused on New Hampshire, the first primary in the nation, just days away. Our Whit Johnson on the trail tonight in New Hampshire.
Tonight, an admission from a bruised Joe Biden.
I am not going to sugarcoat it. We took a gut punch in Iowa.
The former vice president going on the attack, taking aim at Senator Bernie Sanders for labeling himself a Democratic socialist.
Donald Trump is desperate to pin the socialist label of socialist on our party. We can't let him do that.
Biden in a disappointing 4th place out of Iowa, today also hitting current leader Pete Buttigieg hard on electability.
For this party to nominate someone who's never held office higher than mayor of a town of 100,000 people in Indiana, I do believe it's a risk.
But the bigger risk, the former South Bend mayor says, is to fall back on the familiar.
How do you think you were able to outperform other moderates in the race like Joe Biden?
Well, I think the key is a focus on the future and a desire to win. And every time my party has won in the last half century, it's been with a candidate focused on the future and opening the door to a new generation.
Buttigieg taking a victory lap through New Hampshire. But with the caucus confusion fresh in the rearview mirror, Bernie Sanders arguing the race is still close in Iowa.
I assume that one of these years that vote count will be completed. We are winning the popular vote.
All right, let's dig a little deeper on this issue. Whit Johnson and our other campaign reporter, Rachel Scott, join us now from Manchester, New Hampshire. And with the candidates clearly still frustrated with that delay in Iowa, the vote totals, let's take a listen to what Mayor Pete told you today.
But is it frustrating that on caucus night in Iowa that you weren't able to claim that victory outright?
It is. I mean, this is one of the best, probably the best moments in the campaign in terms of what we've been able to achieve since we got in. And it would, of course, have been good to have that officially verified and confirmed on the same day rather than having the results come in as they do.
Tom, there's no question this was a disappointment for Pete Buttigieg and the campaign that they weren't able to, on that night, come out in prime time in front of millions of people watching and give that victory speech in Iowa. They were banking on Iowa. They liked what they were seeing out on the campaign trail, out in the field. They feel that they are building a broad coalition across the political spectrum. That said, though, they're still taking that win. They claimed the victory even before we started seeing official results come through. Mayor Pete jumped on an airplane from Iowa to New Hampshire overnight, stepped off the plane and had the busiest schedule of the day yesterday with 8 events on no sleep. So he's got the pep in his step. He's got the bounce. They're feeling confident, but they know they have a long road ahead, and they are really hoping for a big result here in New Hampshire, Tom.
8 events, that is impressive. Maybe not the big mo, but he definitely has some momentum. Whit, I want to turn now to Joe Biden, though, because we saw Biden today take a different strategy now. He's going on the offense, attacking both Bernie Sanders and Mayor Pete.
Yeah, Tom, there's no question the gloves are off, and this is a serious shift from what we've seen from Joe Biden so far. Our producers who've been on the campaign with him day after day said that they have not seen him like this going after his rivals in the race. I mean, going after Bernie Sanders, using that label that Sanders has given himself of being a Democratic socialist, but saying outright, look, this is an electability problem. This is what President Trump and the Republicans will attack him for. So we're seeing this shift from Joe Biden, because there's no question that was a disappointment in Iowa. That 4th place finish is not what they wanted. They were trying to hedge expectations in the beginning, but this is definitely not what they wanted. They know it's a fight. They're now looking for a better result here in New Hampshire. But the campaign telling us that Joe Biden and his whole plan here is really for the long game, and that they're really banking on things like Super Tuesday, when you've got multiple states, you've got more than 1,300 delegates up for grabs. That that's where they're hoping they can build their own coalition. They can really start racking up the delegate count and make a run towards the nomination, Tom.
Yeah, we'll have to say if he sticks with this strategy over the next couple of days leading into our debate on Friday night. All right, Whit, thank you for that. Rachel, you were with Senator Sanders earlier today. What's he trying to do to basically stay on top of New Hampshire? Because most polls have him leading there pretty big. He also had a big win against Hillary Clinton 4 years ago.
Yeah, that's exactly right, Tom. And Senator Sanders is doing a little spin of his own, right? I mean, he's saying that he had a victory in Iowa when it comes to turnout. He had a very large turnout from these early results, although he said it wasn't as large as he did expect. But here in New Hampshire, he's hoping for a reset and a repeat. As you mentioned, he did win New Hampshire back in 2016 against Hillary Clinton, and he has a robust ground operation here. He has the most paid staffers on the ground, 131. He's tied for the most field offices with Senator Elizabeth Warren, and he also has a little bit of a backyard advantage, right? He's from the neighboring state of Vermont, and when 538, our neighbors there, crunched the numbers, they found that when major presidential candidates came from neighboring states, since 1972, they have won the New Hampshire primary 67% of the time and pretty much always place in the top two. So that's a pretty good batting average, Tom.
Rachel Scott and Whit Johnson, our dynamic campaign reporting team, we thank you guys for your reports. We'll check back with you tomorrow night. And a reminder, the race for 2020 continues in New Hampshire this Friday with the next Democratic debate hosted by ABC News. George Stephanopoulos moderates along with David Muir and our very own Lindsay Davis. Coverage starts right here on ABC News Live at 7 p.m. Eastern. And we have some breaking news just coming in right now. Legendary actor and Hollywood icon Kirk Douglas has died. Douglas starred in over 90 movies during Hollywood's golden age, including this one right here, Spartacus, Champion, and The Bad and the Beautiful, along with A Gunfight at the OK Corral, to name a few. On social media, Kirk's son, Michael Douglas, said his father, quote, leaves a legacy in film that will endure for generations to come, and history as a renowned philanthropist who worked to aid the public and bring peace to the planet. He added, Dad, I love you so much, and I am so proud to be your son. Kirk Douglas, 103 years old, will have much more on his remarkable career later in our broadcast. And when we come back, 2 flights packed with Americans evacuating the coronavirus epicenter, now back in the U.S. as we're learning about a new case here. We'll tell you where. The dramatic shootout in New Orleans, famous French Quarter, the gunman opening fire on officers in their patrol car. And new developments in the search for 2 missing Idaho children, their mother and her new husband still in Hawaii. New video raising even more questions. Stay with us. Terrifying video out of New Orleans, French Quarter. A gunman approaching a police car, pulling the handgun out of his waistband and aiming it at a marked car. 4 officers immediately opening fire, taking that suspect down. And police say he was still trying to pull the trigger as he fell to the street. The suspect wounded but is expected to recover. Fortunately, no officers were hurt during this incident. That is some new developments in the search for those 2 missing children from Idaho. Their mother and her new husband remain in Hawaii. Tonight, the courts ordered they should show proof those children were okay last week. Still no signs of them. But surveillance from a storage unit is raising new questions. Here's ABC's Clayton Sandow.
A new mystery tonight in the case of siblings missing for months. 17-year-old Tylee Ryan and 7-year-old J.J. Vallow. Video obtained by East Idaho News reportedly shows their mother, Lori Vallow, and several others visiting a Rexburg, Idaho storage unit last fall. They leave behind children's items, but also take things out, like this heavy tote. Police say this video is now part of their investigation. Where are your kids? Cameras from East Idaho News caught up to Vallow and her new husband, Chad Daybell, at their condo in Hawaii, as police served Vallow with an order to tell authorities where the kids are, an order she ignored. Adding to the mystery, in the last year, both Vallow and Daybell's previous spouses, as well as Vallow's brother, died under circumstances authorities say are suspicious. Family members want answers.
Ever since she's been involved in this doomsday cult, that is not the same Lori that we knew for 13 years.
All right, our thanks to Clayton Sandell. Still so many questions on this case. Let's bring in former FBI agent and ABC News contributor Brad Garrett. Brad was a hostage negotiator with the FBI for 17 years. Brad, after they missed the court's deadline, now what? Can authorities do anything to get this mom to come back to Idaho?
I don't know about that, but clearly there are a number of things, Tom, they can do. For example, first of all, the mystery around the storage facility. Children's toys, other things. Apparently on one day, Lori's brother went in and out of this facility like 7-8 times. What is that all about? They're going to need to timeline that. Why did she take JJ out of school after he'd only been in school for 3 weeks? And then it's the same month where no one ever sees him again. So what I'm suggesting is there has to be a tightening of the timeline of both of them, of both Chad and Lori, because let's face it, if they've harmed these children in some form or fashion, people tend not to be sophisticated at that. And there's going to be clues. There's going to be other people around them, like Melanie Bordeaux, who apparently was running with them for a period of time. What does she know? In other words, draw the circle tighter of the people they were associated with, in particular when they were still in Idaho.
Brad, as we heard in Clayton's report, those missing children's mother and her partner had spouses who died under circumstances authorities now say are suspicious. Authorities also tell ABC News they're working to build a case against the Daybells. Are those previous incidents relevant?
Well, they're certainly relevant as far as other crimes. You know, the mystery in this case, obviously, are 2 missing children, but the bigger mystery is, why did they disappear? The why may help you figure out, perhaps, where they are at this given juncture. But I think, again, to go back, the answer to this story still lies in Idaho because, again, public source says and the police say they don't think the kids ever made it to Hawaii, which means that this is really still focused in Idaho, in particular to finding both these children.
You know, I want to go back to that clue you were talking about, potential clue. People put children's items and other odds and ends in storage units all the time. In the end, could that surveillance video be considered significant unless police find something meaningful inside?
Well, only if you know exactly what they took out and what the motive was in using the storage facility. If these children have been harmed, then why are you storing things in a storage facility knowing they're not there anymore? We don't know the answer to that, of course. But the key is, why did they have that facility? Because there's going to be a reason beyond just to store bicycles and things that belong to the children. That's going to be, I think, potentially a key in this case.
All right, Brad, thank you so much for that. We appreciate it. We want to move on now to some other news. Notorious Ponzi king Bernie Madoff tonight says he is dying and wants out of prison. Madoff says he is in the end advanced stages of kidney disease and has 18 months to live. In a court filing, the 81-year-old is asking a judge for a compassionate release. Madoff is serving a life sentence for running the biggest Ponzi scheme in U.S. history. And we still have much more ahead tonight. The desperate search, an avalanche burying a bus. Take a look at that. And a snowplow when a second avalanche strikes. And from the first reported cluster inside a seafood market to the virus spreading around the globe, we'll walk you through the anatomy of an outbreak. And on what would have been his 25th birthday, Trayvon Martin's father with a touching message to his son. Gone too soon. We'll be right back. Back now with that devastating avalanche in Turkey, a small group buried on a mountain road. Dozens of rescuers trying to help. A second avalanche burying them. Officials say at least 38 people are dead, including 33 emergency workers. The fear tonight is there may be more people buried beneath the snow. While in the Turkish capital of Istanbul, harrowing video capturing the moment a plane skids off a runway before falling down an embankment, breaking into pieces. Our David Curley, who covers aviation, has more.
The question tonight, why couldn't this 737 stop on the rain-covered runway as it rolls right off the end? The Turkish jetliner disappearing down an embankment where it breaks up into three pieces. A small fire breaking out, seen from the highway along the Istanbul area airport, as passengers scramble out the break in the fuselage and the exits. Emergency workers flood the crash site, carrying away some of the injured, including children. There were 183 on board. 3/4 were injured. At least 3 people did not survive. Just a month ago, at this very same airport, another Pegasus jet ran off the runway into the mud. And in 2018, at another Turkish airport, a Pegasus 737 slid down an embankment, stopping just above the Black Sea.
All right, our thanks to David Curley. And when we come back, so many questions about the deadly coronavirus, from how it started to how big of a threat it is. We take an in-depth look at the outbreak. And here are the top headlines right now on abcnews.com. Stay with us.
Donald John Trump, President of the United States, is not guilty as charged in the first article of impeachment.
There you have it. President Trump acquitted in the Senate. Near party line vote. All the Democrats voting to convict, all the Republicans save one. No senator has ever voted to convict a president of his own party in an impeachment trial.
As a senator juror, I swore an oath before God to exercise impartial justice. I am profoundly religious. My faith is at the heart of who I am.
I was surprised and disappointed, but we have much work to do for the American people. And I think Senator Romney has been largely supportive of most everything we've tried to accomplish.
The Senate turned its back on the truth. Democrats walked out of the Senate chamber with their heads held high.
As Democratic candidates crisscross New Hampshire, the two contenders who believe they won in Iowa are a bit frustrated by the slow rollout of the results.
I assume that one of these years that vote count will be completed.
This is one of the best, probably the best moments in the campaign in terms of what we've been able to achieve since we got in.
Former Vice President Joe Biden has responded to an apparent fourth-place finish by launching far more pointed attacks.
Every Democrat will have to carry the label Senator Sanders has chose for himself. Donald Trump is desperate to pin the socialist label of socialist on our party.
And Americans who had been in the coronavirus epicenter in China being flown into U.S. air bases today, they're now under quarantine. And as of today, a 12th confirmed corona case here in the U.S.
The UK also working to evacuate its citizens from Wuhan, a second charter flight scheduled for this Sunday. In the Japanese port of Yokohama, the Diamond Princess cruise ship with 3,700 people on board has been quarantined as everyone undergoes health screenings. So far, 10 people tested positive and have been transported to the hospital.
Right now, the ship is in crisis mode.
And now, another cruise ship being quarantined. In Hong Kong Harbor, 1,800 passengers on this ship now being tested after dozens of crew members show symptoms of coronavirus.
Why couldn't this 737 stop on the rain-covered runway as it rolls right off the end? The Turkish jetliner disappearing down an embankment where it breaks up into three pieces. There were 183 on board. 3/4 were injured. At least 3 people did not survive.
And welcome back to ABC News Live. For the past couple of weeks, you've seen all of the headlines surrounding the coronavirus. Hundreds dead in China, thousands desperate for medical attention, millions living under quarantine. With fear and anxiety growing as the number of cases do as well, we're going to take an in-depth look tonight at the mysterious respiratory illness and seeing what's being done right now, trying to put all of this public health emergency into context. But first, a desperate race by so many Americans to get out of China, the epicenter of that virus. 2 planes touching down early this morning. Will Carr joins us now outside Travis Air Force Base in California, where those Americans just landed. At least 2 more planes due to arrive later this week. Will, do we have any idea when the timeline will be for those evacuees to go home?
We do, Tom. Everybody who has been quarantined here in the United States or will be quarantined moving forward has to spend at least 14 days from the day they left China on the military bases. Earlier today, those 2 planes flew in here to California. Some were then diverted down to Southern California, a military base there. The rest of those passengers, more than 170, are now quarantined here at Travis Air Force Base. The CDC came out and told me that a child on one of those flights actually developed a fever. Once they landed here, that child was rushed to the hospital and is now being tested for the novel coronavirus. As for the rest of the passengers, they all have to stay with their families in their rooms. They are allowed outside, but they cannot get within 6 feet of the other families while they spend the next 2 weeks here.
Speaks to all the urgency of this and all this happening. There's another new confirmed case in the U.S., this time in Wisconsin.
That's right. That makes this the 12th case. And I asked the CDC point blank earlier today if Americans here in the United States need to be worried. They told me no, at this point, it is still low risk. They said people really don't need to be going out and buying masks. If you just go to any airport right now in the United States, you're going to see people walking around with those masks. In China, it is a different story. The virus continues to spread rapidly. Almost 500 people have been killed so far, and that number seems to go up every day. Tom.
All right, Will Carr for us tonight. Meanwhile, 20 people, including 3 Americans, are being treated in Japan after testing positive for the virus. You're looking at a live shot now of that cruise ship in the port city of Yokohama near Tokyo, where 3,700 people are facing 2 weeks of quarantine. The Diamond Princess cruise ship was sailing from Hong Kong, carrying a passenger who tested positive. Meanwhile, another cruise ship with hundreds of people on board are under quarantine in Hong Kong after 3 passengers from a previous voyage tested positive. And on the ground in Hong Kong, we've seen these scenes of people lining up for surgical masks. All people entering from mainland China will undergo quarantine for 2 weeks starting this weekend. So we wanted to get a closer look at what life is like on the inside of an outbreak. What's being done to stop it? ABC's Ian Panel has been in the region and has this in-depth report.
Wuhan, China, a sprawling city of 11 million, bigger than New York or London. Testimony to China's rise as an economic superpower. Wuhan's a major transport hub known as China's thoroughfare, and the city where the potentially deadly coronavirus outbreak began. December last year. It was in this fish market where the first major cluster of cases was reported. Medical officials are still uncertain where the virus came from, but today the site and the city are under strict quarantine. One single location setting off an international alarm.
We begin tonight with the growing concern as the toll from that deadly coronavirus now grows, spreading from Wuhan, China, and tonight that first case here in the U.S.
As the highly contagious virus known as 2019 nCoV spread, Chinese officials who'd been slow to respond finally began taking extraordinary measures that only an authoritarian regime can do, quarantining tens of millions of its own citizens. In the early days, Bob Woodruff flew to Wuhan, nearly everyone on the flight wearing face masks.
So since I got off the plane here in Wuhan, we've had no screening. They haven't been looking for testing any temperatures, anything.
Flights were still leaving the city then, but that soon stopped as the unprecedented lockdown began, beginning with flights. The airport empty, train stations a ghost town. The streets of this once bustling city of Wuhan almost totally deserted. Some taking matters into their own hands, literally walling themselves off from the outside world. And temperature checkpoints now a common sight across Asia. More than 50 million people barred from leaving Hubei province alone. But the virus still spread. Now every province and territory in the world's most populous country has cases. In less than 2 months, more than 24 countries affected, from Australia to Cambodia to France and the United States.
The first confirmed U.S. case of that mysterious virus tracked here to Washington state.
Countries are desperately trying to keep the virus at bay. Airports across the U.S. screening passengers for potential symptoms. At least 54 airlines have now suspended or reduced service to China. And now the government advising against any travel to the mainland. But still, it's spreading. The situation's so urgent, China's built 2 new hospitals in a matter of days. This extraordinary time-lapse aired on state media, showing over 2,300 more beds being added this week. But that still isn't enough to deal with patient demand. And now this stadium in Wuhan is being turned into a makeshift hospital. Elsewhere, in overcrowded clinics, medical professionals in hazmat suits treat patients lining the hallways. No precaution, no protection, too extreme. The lives of people here have been suspended. Crucial medical supplies and food sent directly to some homes as Chinese authorities enforce the lockdown. Despite the millions stranded, the people of Wuhan are encouraging each other from their windows, shouting to keep fighting on. And the only ones lucky enough to be able to escape from here now are foreign nationals, those with the right passport to get out. More than 500 Americans have already paid thousands of dollars to evacuate from the infected region, with more flights expected this week. U.S. medical personnel at the ready with hazmat suits. All who take the flight now have to be quarantined for at least 2 weeks. But some choosing not to take the ticket out. Doug Perez, an American in Wuhan, refused to leave his girlfriend and his dog behind.
Just things are looking really bad. and they still look bad. We go over there, and we say we're trying to take the dog for a walk, and they say no. They say you can't leave, and that's kind of dawned on me, like, how bad this could get.
Normally my community is usually very, very full of people all over the place running around.
Justin Steese, a US citizen, and his family are stuck in Wuhan. He had the option to take his newborn back to America, but his wife Ling is Chinese, and just days ago she was told she wouldn't be able to join them and would have to stay behind.
Ling and I were very much upset about the result. First time I've seen her cry about this the entire time. There's no way I would ever separate a mother and her 1-month-old baby.
But now the US is allowing Steese and his wife to get back to America. But for now, the Chinese are holding up the process. Back in Hong Kong, a city that faced the full force of the deadly SARS outbreak in 2003, residents like Henry are taking few chances.
Now Hong Kong people has the alertness about the virus. 18 years ago, we don't have so many mainlanders coming to Hong Kong, right? But after 18 years, we have many tourists, and the relationship between Hong Kong and China is much more closer than 18 years ago.
But infections for this new type of coronavirus have surpassed SARS, and it's spreading faster too. Hong Kong trying to protect itself. Ferry boats and trains suspended, flights to the mainland halved, and a run on protective gear.
Hundreds of people are now lined all the way around the block because this store here has just got a supply of face masks. You can see them here, but they're being tightly rationed. If you have a look up here on the wall, it's basically telling people we've tried our best, we don't have any more masks, and that's the situation across Hong Kong.
Medical workers in Hong Kong are now on strike, demanding that all borders with mainland China be closed. The global financial centre just recorded its first death from the virus. And as it continues to spread, the World Health Organization declaring a global emergency.
In the last 24 hours, we had the most cases in a single day since the outbreak started.
While the coronavirus remains less deadly than the seasonal flu, scientists say it's just as contagious. So for now, this is what passes for life in Wuhan. The largest quarantine effort in the history of mankind failed to contain this virus. China admitting it was too slow to acknowledge it had a problem and too late to warn its own people and the world, leaving many to wonder what happens in the increasingly likely chance that this virulent outbreak can't be contained. And what can we do to stop it in our interconnected world? Ian Pannell, ABC News, Hong Kong.
All right, our thanks to Ian Pannell for that in-depth report tonight. Let's get some more perspective on this current outbreak, specifically some of the fears people may have at home and what we should perhaps really be worried about. Joining us live right now is Brandon Brown from the School of Medicine at the University of California, Riverside. Brandon, thanks for joining us tonight. You've lived under quarantine during the SARS epidemic. How successful are quarantines?
So far, they've actually been very successful here in this country. You know, you've heard even today that there's been one plane that's been brought to March Air Base, and you have 2 more planes. And so far, it's actually been pretty effective.
You know, earlier today, the general of the World Health Organization said they need greater cooperation from the more developed countries in reporting. And we've heard reports that the Chinese may actually be underreporting cases. How do you combat sort of the lack of information sometimes in a panic-stricken time or misinformation?
It's real difficult, and that's true. So one of the reasons might be a lack of report of information, but probably the more likely reason is we don't actually know who has the virus over there and anywhere. So because of the incubation period from 2 to 14 days, we're going to continue to see kind of these numbers of infection rise, and we do have to be aware of the misinformation, especially around social media. And one of the ways that we can try and combat that is to point people to information sources that are reliable in this country, including the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention.
All right, tell us what you think we really should be concerned about. Here in the U.S., we're in the middle of a flu epidemic, and you've said this is much more pressing and deserving of our attention. But when you look at the pictures coming out of China, coronavirus is still very terrifying to Americans.
Yeah, it's really scary, and the unknown is the thing that's really scary. So if you look at the numbers right now for the novel coronavirus, we have over 25,000 people who are infected, just under 500 who have been killed by the coronavirus. Right now in the U.S., we're in the flu season, and since October 1st, there's been about 20 million infected and about 10,000 who have been killed from the flu. So if we put these numbers into perspective, we should really focus on what's pertinent right now to us, and that's the flu virus.
All right, Brandon Brown for us tonight from UC Riverside. Brandon, thanks so much for joining us. We do appreciate it. As that quarantine effort in China continues here at home, researchers are working furiously to learn more about this deadly virus and how a vaccine for the coronavirus works. Our Dr. Jen Ashton went to the National Institutes of Health laboratory to see where that work stands.
So this is where you're actually working on the coronavirus vaccine. Right. When you hear about the sequence of the vaccine being made public, that's like a recipe, right? For scientists, you know,
the sequence is the genetic code of the virus. And if you have the entire genetic code, in there are genes that code for different parts of the virus. There's one very important part of the virus called the spike protein.
That's this.
It's right here, this guy here, the spike protein. So this is the coronavirus. They call it corona because it's like a crown with these spikes. So this is one of them here. This is the blown up one. So one of the critical issue is how do you stabilize this protein to make it a good immunogen to give to a person? They've done that. And now the next thing is get it into people. It's straightforward. Okay. When you make a vaccine, you want to induce an antibody that helps to interfere with a virus or any other pathogen from getting to its ultimate target. The ultimate target of the coronavirus is the respiratory tract, your lung. The whole goal of the vaccine is that when this coronavirus comes through your nose, your mouth, into your lung, to prevent it from hitting the target that will infect you, you just want to block it. So you want to block the interaction between this spike protein and the receptor on your lung.
What do you think the chances are that this novel coronavirus outbreak could become a pandemic?
If we start to see in multiple countries that there's sustained transmission, particularly if it gets into countries in the developing world, like in Africa, where some of those countries don't have the healthcare system to do identification, isolation, and contact tracing, then the likelihood of it becoming a global pandemic is much bigger. Right now, we're at that critical stage that we don't know if it's going to go there, but it is certainly feasible that it will. The thing that would raise it to another level of concern is if we started to see sustained transmission from person to person in multiple places. If all of a sudden we started to see in Chicago and New York and California and Arizona that there's sustained transmission, then that you ratchet that up to a level of concern. Fortunately, we've not seen that.
So many scientists, so many public health officials say you prepare for the worst and hope for the best. That's the way
Well, that's exactly what we're doing, and I think that's a good question because that gets into sometimes the confusion where health officials say that the risk for America is still low, and yet we take this really, really very seriously. Those are not incompatible because you prepare for the very, very, very worst, but obviously you hope for the best.
Okay, prepare for the worst, hope for the best. We have Dr. Jen Ashton now. She's joining us live in the studio. Dr. Fauci, okay, give us your take on Dr. Fauci and what was happening here.
I mean, he's a legend, Tom. He is the top infectious disease doctor in the country. He has decades of experience mobilizing not only the U.S. response, but global responses to Ebola, Zika, SARS, MERS. He has seen it all. I think what really stood out to me is that right now, and you know, we're in constant touch with the CDC in terms of their briefing, and right now the most concerning thing, Tom, is that they have not yet invited CDC into China to independently assess the data, the disease response. That's a problem. So until China invites the CDC in, we're getting this information kind of removed from a distance, and that makes the CDC a little uneasy. That's number one. Number two, big news today and good good news for the U.S. response is that the CDC finally distributed locally about 100 testing kits so that regional testing can occur. Right now, all of the tests have to go to Atlanta to be tested at the CDC. So in the next couple of days, we'll start to see more regional testing become available in this country. That will expedite things because we are going to expect to see more cases. I want to really also emphasize, I know we like to focus on numbers. We're numbers people. Right. But whether it's 11, whether it's 12, whether it's 13, we expect those numbers to go up. I'm more interested in what the estimates are on the epidemiologic models coming out of China because
Can we trust those models, though?
Well, remember, there's numbers being reported from China, but then CDC and World Health Organization officials are also running models, mathematical models. They're the same type of models that we get our CDC estimates from every week, right? Those models are showing numbers exponentially higher than 25,500. So as Dr. Fauci said, we are preparing for a much worse situation. But to be clear, what's going on in China is very different from our response here in this country. Our response here has been aggressive and it's been successful.
Talk to me about the masks. I was out in Los Angeles all last week.
Yeah.
You noticed a lot of people with them just walking around the streets. On the flight back, more people had them in the airplane. What's your take?
Big problem. So first of all, the routine surgical masks that you're seeing people use in China, and you're seeing this panicked footage there because they're unavailable for the general public. That is not the situation here in the United States. We use those surgical masks medically in hospital settings on sick people to protect healthy people around them. Dr. Fauci himself told me that the size of the coronavirus particle is so small that it can infiltrate these surgical masks. So there is no evidence that they are effective in protecting a healthy person. What is happening now, and this is very concerning, is that we're starting to get reports from my colleagues at various hospitals around the country that, you know, those stands that you see in the hospital with those surgical masks, if you're sick, please put on a mask. They're being removed from hospitals because people are stealing those masks. Once you see things like that, Tom, that endangers patients in the hospital, it endangers healthcare workers in the hospital, and that's a big problem.
Speaks to the level of fear, though, too.
Absolutely, and we've said it before, in medicine and science, we have to go based on fact, not fear, and evidence, not emotion.
Last question. There have been some reports that the Olympic Organization Committee is getting concerned about coronavirus. It's this summer. What can you tell us? What's your take?
Listen, I'm not on the IOC. I don't have any inside information about the Olympics and planning, but I can guarantee you that they are looking at that. We don't have a crystal ball about what's going to happen in the future, but for sure it will be a concern. This is a global health crisis right now, and we don't know what it will bring, but there is concern that if it infiltrates poor countries, that it could become a pandemic, and that will not be good for the Olympics.
You have the athletes, but you also have all those tourists that are going to go there, too.
It's going to be a big issue.
All right, Dr. Jen Ashton, thank you so much for breaking it down for us. We always appreciate that. And we will continue on a good note. The stocks up big as investors breathe a little easier about the impact of the coronavirus. The Dow Jones Industrial Average gaining 483 points today. Analysts pointing to reports from Chinese television saying researchers had developed an effective treatment, but the World Health Organization did not confirm that report and say there are no cures for coronavirus, but still the hope making an impact, at least among investors tonight. And when we return, we'll remember a Hollywood legend.
In times like these, the news...
ABC News Live. The president expected to speak after his acquittal. We'll bring it to you on ABC News Live. Also, Olympic organizers are planning to speak on possible impacts from the coronavirus as nations around the world prepare for those games later this summer. And astronaut Christina Cook returns to Earth after setting the record for the longest continuous space flight by a woman. She was also a member of that historic all-female spacewalk. Our congrats to her. And now back to that breaking news we've been following throughout the broadcast. Iconic actor Kirk Douglas passing at the age of 103. His son Michael sharing the news a little while ago. So let's take a look back at the incredible life and career of a true Hollywood legend. Here's ABC's Alex Stone.
I make it again.
But officer...
Young lady, I don't want to discuss this with you. Don't talk to her like that. Shut up!
Kirk Douglas made a career out of playing tough guys.
That's more like it.
It was as an unscrupulous boxer and champion that this son of illiterate Russian immigrants was first recognized as a star. Douglas was nominated for an Oscar and was cast in a series of roles that took advantage of his chiseled good looks and powerful screen presence.
Who gave you the right to dig into me and turn me inside out?
The Bad and the Beautiful brought another Oscar nomination, as did Douglas's portrayal of a tormented Vincent van Gogh in Lust for Life. Douglas played cowboys and colonels.
You're a degenerate, sadistic old man. And you can go to hell before I apologize to you now or ever again.
As executive producer of the epic Spartacus, Douglas broke the notorious Hollywood blacklist by hiring an alleged communist to write the screenplay.
As long as we live, we must stay true to ourselves.
In 1991, Douglas received the American Film Institute's Life Achievement Award. In accepting the honor, he spoke about the power of films to do more than entertain.
Power to focus on some of the problems of the world and help to make it a better place to live in.
Douglas formed a foundation that helped fund hospitals and hundreds of school playgrounds. When not doing charitable work or acting, Douglas was writing. His autobiography, The Ragman's Son, was a bestseller. In 1991, he miraculously survived a helicopter crash which killed 2 others. Then just shy of his 80th birthday, Douglas suffered a debilitating stroke. Months later, in an emotional appearance, he accepted the Oscars Lifetime Achievement Award.
And tonight, I love all of you, and I thank all of you for 50 wonderful years. Thank you.
Douglas continued making movies. In 2003, appearing with his son Michael.
What do you want me to say, that I love you?
His slurred speech was worked into scripts. It was risky, but as this legendary actor once said, in order to achieve anything, you must be brave enough to fail. Alex Stone, ABC News, Hollywood.
And we thank Alex Stone for that amazing look back at an incredible life. Before we go tonight, the image of the day. Workers rolling out the red carpet at the Dolby Theater in Hollywood ahead of Sunday's Academy Awards. No doubt a tribute to Kirk Douglas, probably in the works right now. That is our show for this hour. Stay tuned to ABC News Live for more context and analysis of the day's top stories. I'm Tom Yamas. Thanks so much for watching tonight.